Hello and welcome to the Healthy Middle Ground podcast with me, Jen Curtis. It's been a couple of weeks since I've done a podcast episode, and many of you already know why. So last week I had a miscarriage, and I thought I would do an episode on just some of my thoughts around that, some of my experiences around that. Obviously, not one that everyone's going to want to listen over, but I think if you've been through a miscarriage recently, or if that ever happens to you, or if you just want to know my thoughts on sort of the whole thing, then I thought it'd be better to just put it in a podcast episode rather than plastering it all over social media, where there's probably going to be a lot of people who don't want to see that or need trigger warnings, which I refuse to do just on principle. So I thought this would be a good format to do that. The first thing to say is that I've taken a break from podcasting the past couple of weeks, and not just podcasting, but all of the kind of back end of my business I have just taken a step back from. And the way that my business model works is that it allows me to do that when things happen. So initially, a couple of weeks ago, I took my foot off the pedal because I thought I was pregnant. And I was pregnant. I didn't just think I was. And it was unexpected. It wasn't what I planned. And my husband and I do want to have another child, but in like another year. So I sort of accidentally got pregnant, had some problems with birth control after my third. And the way that I've built my business is so that I kind of have layers to it, like kind of like an onion. And this works so well for me in these sort of years of my life where I've got little kids, I'm going through pregnancies, postpartum, blah, blah, blah. And I've got little kids who go on holidays or are on holiday from nursery, have days off, get sick, and I need to be flexible with my work schedule. And the reason why I say it's layered like an onion is that I have my kind of central tasks that are absolutely critical tasks. And these involve looking after my paying customers, right? So any customer that, or like at the moment I have like 24 clients, and I've been building back up since coming back postpartum, and when I'm fully booked, I can't handle any more. Is 30 clients. So on a weekly basis, I look after these clients. I have a weekly check-in, which is on Sunday, and I send feedback on Monday. They have questions over WhatsApp, so I have to provide WhatsApp support. And I keep a list every week, very organized, of exactly what each client needs. So sometimes, every 6 to 8 weeks, they need a new training program, or they've uploaded videos for me to send feedback on, or they need me to go and look at my Fitness Pal to give some tips on how to change things. So these are my absolutely critical tasks that I can't not do. On any given week, I have to get all of these things done because people are paying me. And the downside of my job is that I can't just completely disappear, but I can reel back to just those critical tasks. And those tasks, depending on how many clients I have, take between 15 and 20 hours a week. So on like a week where I've got sick kids and things are going on, I can reel all the way back just to those critical tasks. And it obviously doesn't mean I can just take the whole week off, but it does mean that I can take a lot of the week off, and I can take off time to go to doctor's appointments or just to sit and watch TV if I'm feeling shit. And this is what I did throughout my last pregnancy. It was only after my second, I set up my current coaching business. So then when I got pregnant with my third, with Ronnie, I was really able to go from I was working 40 hours a week, I had 30 clients, and I could just reel back to 20 hours a week, looking after those 20 clients, had plenty of time to rest because I felt absolutely shit in my first trimester. And then when I started feeling better again, I could do a little bit more work. And then the next layer of the onion is stuff that is still for my paying clients, but it's not like the direct service that I'm giving each individual. So it's things like adding content to the member site. This is sort of a long-term project, right? And I try to do at least a video every single week where I add a bit more content every week to this member site. But if I don't get to it on one particular week, it's not the end of the world. There's still tons of material for people to get through. And then like the final layer is all of the marketing stuff. So it's like writing emails, doing these podcasts, doing social media posts, all of that kind of stuff. That all needs to happen on a weekly basis. Obviously, it's the least important task, right? Because it's about the long game. And if that's the first thing that goes, if I need to reel back and can't do all the things. And there is actually one other final thing, and that is sales, right? So when somebody wants to work with me, we book a sales call, a discovery call, a consultation, whatever you want to call it. But ultimately, it's a sales call for people to have a chat with somebody for 20, 30 minutes, find out more about them, and just basically, give them an idea of whether or not the program's going to be, if it's going to be a good fit. Sometimes it's not. But, by the time someone's got through my social media, it usually is. So this is also something that I would just cancel on those weeks where things are, normally I try to have like 2 or 3 calls every single week. But when I'm feeling absolutely rubbish and I can't take on a new client, then I would cancel any of those sorts of calls or push them off. And also the onboarding of a new client. So when somebody starts with me, there's a lot of work to do to go through their intake form and to go through what they're currently doing, write them a training plan, write them a nutrition plan. And people need a lot of support in those first sort of like 1 to 3 months. So again, I just wouldn't take on any new clients when I'm having a bad week. I can just reel back and look after the clients that I currently do have and make sure they get the exact same service, right? No matter what's going on in my life, they get the exact same service, but I'm just doing those 15 to 20 hours of that service provision rather than all the other things like sales and marketing and social media and all the back end of my business and all of that kind of stuff. So for me, that's the first way that I deal with all of these things. And for me, this has been an absolute dream since I set up my business because I've had 2 really rough weeks. The first week was a lot of pregnancy symptoms setting in, but also a lot of uncertainty as I was having sort of really inconclusive pregnancy tests and stuff like that. And so sort of emotionally, I was a bit all over the place. And then I could just sort out things for my clients and then rest a little bit before going to pick my kids up. And then the second week was very emotional. It was physically much better. But I actually had the miscarriage towards the beginning of the week. And so like physically, all of the pregnancy symptoms, like the fatigue and stuff like that, brain fog, were all starting to go away. And I felt much, much better. But obviously mentally, I was really devastated in the beginning and needed some time to just like recover from that, just give myself a little bit of space. So having the business model that I have allows me to navigate those kind of things. And I feel incredibly grateful to have that because so many women don't. You still have to show up. If you have a full-time job, you still have to show up and do your work. You still got your 40 hours a week to do, no matter what's going on at home or going on in your body or going on in your mind. So I feel incredibly grateful that I do have that set up. It's amazing and amazingly flexible for this chapter of like having little kids and going through pregnancies and postpartum and all of that stuff. And so as well as considering myself very, very lucky, I think I also have a bit more, because that's built into my lifestyle, I kind of almost have more opportunity than a lot of other women my age or, with the same number of kids as me and with little kids. I'm more able to like take time off for myself because I can reel back on all of those unessential tasks in my business. And I don't have to do a 40-hour week. I can do a 15-hour or 20-hour week. My kids are still in full-time daycare. So I've got like that other 20 hours a week to chill and to recover and to just give myself some space and some time. And not everyone has that. So that means I can still show up and do my job. It means I can still do my workouts. It means I can still, be there for my kids and my husband. But like I have that time built into my schedule that I can actually take off. So I think because I have that time that I can take to myself, it meant that I can kind of get over things a bit quicker than I otherwise, might need if I didn't have that bandwidth within my job and I was still having to do a 40-hour week. I'm sure this sort of thing would drag on a lot longer for me. The other thing that I really wanted to talk about is that one of the things, I wrote a post about having the miscarriage. It's a strange post to make, and I do find that, I don't like sharing certain aspects of my personal life online anymore. I've had quite a lot of clarity about what I want to share and what I don't want to share. And these are definitely some of the topics that I find a little bit difficult because they do feel very personal to me, and I don't like oversharing on the internet. And so I find them a little bit harder to share and open up about. But at the same time, I do think it's quite important to share because, I run a business helping mums of young kids to lose weight, and there's so much going on in this chapter of our lives. And a big part of what I show online and show on my social media is the fact that life is crazy and hectic at the moment. Sick kids, and then you have to miss work because someone's off sick and you've got to look after a baby, or all of the realities of having like young children and babies. I'm going through that too. I'm in the trenches as well. I'm trying to really practice what I preach in terms of, I work predominantly with mums of young children, and the women on my program, they're going through all of these things. They have sick kids one week, and then the next week they got a work deadline, and then they're traveling, and then it's their husband's birthday, and all of these things are going on in their lives. And I'm running a program essentially showing them how to lose weight and get fit and stay fit and be very strong in this time of our lives. And so I think that a really important part of my social media is showing that I'm walking the walk and not just talking the talk, showing that I'm also doing that. I'm also staying fit and healthy through all of the hitting the fan like every couple of months and things going on and birthdays and everything else. And this is just a reality of these, childbearing years. It's estimated that as many as 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage in the first trimester or at some point. So it's very, very, very common to have an early miscarriage. And everything that I went through, this is the first time I've had a miscarriage. I've never had any fertility problems. I've always gotten pregnant. I've got 3 kids. I've been pregnant 3 times. I got pregnant, the first time I tried with all of them. So often I find that the way that my work works as well is that I understand where mums are at and what they're going through in this phase of their lives, because I'm going through it too. But what I often find is that there are always going to be certain things that I haven't been through. And one of them was a miscarriage. I'd never been through that before, and I didn't fully understand psychologically what that means for someone to go through that. So this experience also, I always think about how it then affects my job, or how it then has an impact on me doing my job better, because it does help me have so much more sympathy for somebody who's been through that, or who's going through that, or if it happens to one of my clients, or if it's happened to them in the past. Like that, a big part of this is me knowing what that means and what that means for her and for her family and what she's going through. So I find it very, very, like, these sorts of experiences, I find them very useful in my job as well. That maybe, a trainer who doesn't have kids, or who hasn't been through a miscarriage, or who's a man, for example, like maybe they don't understand how these things will affect you, and how, you're not going to be on the diet. You're not going to be showing up and doing your workouts necessarily. And it's going to take you a little while to bounce back. And I also thought it was important for me to share, to show that I am, like, to show that I do go through these things as well, and that I am going through these very normal experiences that happen when trying to have baby, and to show also that I'm still trying to maintain a healthy lifestyle through that experience. It's not just like, okay, I disappeared for a month and got really fat and just ate all my feelings. Like, there's also an element of trying to stay on top of things and try and stay healthy, trying to show up and do your workouts, trying to still be active and all of that kind of stuff. It's still important to try to do, because it's about my overall health. And so I wanted to share that, so you all knew what I was going through, and to a certain extent as well, that, like, despite that, I'm still going to get on with, I obviously took a break from all of my goals and things like that. But I'm going to get back on it. And just before I had this miscarriage, I was starting a new fat loss phase. I just started working with a coach. It was going really well. I dropped like 1.5 kilos. I'd managed to drop my calories down. I was feeling really good. I was feeling really lean, and I had about another 2 kilos to go to reach my goal. And it was all going really, really well. And it obviously all got interrupted. But I'm going to pick that back up again now and start working towards my goals again. And I think it's important to show that as well, that despite these things going on, it's not going to completely derail me. Yes, it is an interruption. Yes, it meant that I have to take a step back in terms of my goals, but I am going to get back on track. And yeah, a big part of my job, I think, is showing that I can walk the walk and do those things and not just coach someone else through it, but that, I can get on with it and do it as well. And finally, I kind of wanted to I wanted to talk about what I kind of learned through this experience in terms of how tumultuous it is. But also, this might sound like a bit of a strange thing to say, but also that it's not the end of the world, and how important it is to pick yourself back up again and get back on with real life and start getting back towards your goal. Because I think in the women's and mummy space online, we're really good at the empathy thing. We're really, really good at giving endless empathy and all the space in the world to feel your feelings and talk about your feelings. But we're often not very good at the accountability side of kind of be strong. It's not the end of the world. You've got 3 other kids to look after. You're strong. You can handle it, and kind of encouraging women to get past it. I think we have, if we look wider at just the trends in society at the moment, we do have a victimhood culture, and we have a real issue with, people weaponizing their victimhood. And we see women do that, talking about the patriarchy and things like that. We see it on the race side of things. There is this victimhood Olympics going on. So if you're you get these victimhood points. If you're a woman and you're also black and you're also gay and you're also trans and you've also got one leg, you kind of gain all these victimhood points, and you have more victimhood points than other people who don't have these things. And we do also have a culture with, well, first of all, I was going to say over-identification with our trauma, but also the overuse of the word trauma, right? That everything is a trauma. Every aspect of our childhoods, of perfectly normal childhoods, of parents, talking about wanting to lose weight or something like that has become a trauma. And everything is a trauma. And I think we overuse that word, and we kind of overdo the empathy side of things. And we almost kind of get, what we end up with us is a suicidal empathy. And what I was really struck with, that I found really, really interesting, is, so the post that I made about the miscarriage, I said, I expressed my sadness at it and my grief. But then I also expressed that I feel incredibly grateful for what I have. I have 3 beautiful, healthy children. I've never had problems with fertility before. I have an incredible man by my side who I'm massively in love with and who's a great partner and all of this stuff. And I think it's really important to note that there's another side to grief, right? Grief is obviously, a horrible thing to feel and to go through, but it can also really, really heighten our joy and our gratitude if we approach it correctly. And you have to let the grief in. I lost my mum when I was 20, and my family didn't know how to deal with that. And we all kind of buried our grief and sort of tried to pretend it wasn't happening. And I know what that feels like, to suffer a massive loss. And my mum was 47. She died of breast cancer. She had only been sick for about a year. It happened very, very quickly. The cancer took over. And we were told after a year, we were told she had between 2 months and 2 years to live, and she died 10 days later. So everything happened so quickly. And I know what it feels like to have a tremendous loss in your life. and to not grieve properly, to not let the sadness in and to try and like repress it. But I didn't get over that experience in my life very easily. It actually took me years. It took me 5 years until I actually went to bereavement counselling and dealt with my grief. So I know what it feels like to repress true grief and not let it in and to not get over it. And what I found really interesting was because in my post, I tried to convey a message of balance, right? My big thing is like the healthy middle ground, balance, right? That there is a balance. There is a balance somewhere between grief and gratitude. And that even though I gave myself space and grace to feel that grief and that sadness, I also need to acknowledge my gratitude and all the things that I do have in life and how lucky I am. And also, you know, the particular timing for me is that in the backdrop of the pregnancy and then the miscarriage was the whole story with the Bibas family unfolding. And you know, it's so tragic. It's just literally the most tragic story I've ever heard in my life. And we all, like, collectively, in the Jewish community and in the Israeli community, have been like grieving that and watching that story in absolute horror the past couple of weeks. It's very, very, like, for me, it was then so clear that, wow, like, God, I'm not going through that. I'm not going through anything like that. And I can't even imagine what the father is feeling now. And I was watching videos of him reading out a eulogy to his wife and his 2 children at their funerals, and just how much pain and how unbearable that must be after he himself was 500 days in captivity and thought that they were still alive, and then was freed and then found out that they were killed in the most brutal way. And I think, like, it was really, really, what was really important to me to convey is that, like, yes, this is a sad thing to happen. And yes, I was sad for a time, but you also have to be strong. You also have to move forward. And, you know, there's a Jewish expression, and what it means is, may those be the only sorrows we know, or the worst sorrows we know, right? Because if that's the worst thing to happen, right, you're pretty lucky and life is pretty amazing. And I've never fully understood that phrase before. It always sounded very, very cold to me. But now, that week, the contrast of my own grief and sorrow of what was going on in my life, with the backdrop, with the contrast to the horrendous grief and sorrow that the Bibas family was going through, I was really, really struck with that contrast and how grateful it made me feel. And I think all of us have, since October 7th, have felt that contrast, the triumph and the tragedy, which is often like the contrast of like the entire Jewish people, the entire story of Israel. And there's constantly this contrast between triumph and tragedy. And I felt that very strongly after October 7th. It was such a tragedy and it was so horrifying what happened. But then I went home and I held on to my children. I was like, thank God you're safe. Thank God you're here with me. I'm so lucky that you're here and we're safe and we're free. And imagining what all these other people were going through that were victims of October 7th. And that is a really important thing to recognize, is that we're in every tragedy and every grief. It also highlights our gratitude. It highlights what we have. It highlights our joy. And I think that if we ignore that, we're ignoring a very, very important part of that grief. And what I found interesting is that I got quite a lot of pushback from a lot of women who basically said, you know, I got a little bit of pushback and criticism from some women to say, you know, you can't compare grief to grief, and everybody's grief is just as bad as everyone else's, and you need to let yourself grieve. I felt that there was a criticism there that I wasn't giving myself enough space and grace to grieve, and that I was bypassing it in some way, or shoving it down, or repressing it, and not allowing myself to feel it because other people have worse grief and worse pain. And I think it's really controversial to say this, but I also think it's very, very true that there is a hierarchy of grief, and there is a tangible and objective difference between different levels of grief. And what I find is that the main with women in general is that women have an absolute commitment to egalitarianism on every single level. Right? That's why we see in nursery and in schools like these participation trophies rather than like merit trophies. And we're constantly trying to sort of say, no, everyone's the same. There's no winners, there's no losers. We're all the same. And I find it does come quite natural to most women to impose a kind of an egalitarianism on everyone in every single realm and in every single experience. And I think it's really, really controversial to say, no, there is such a thing as something that is objectively worse than something else. But it is also just true. Let me give you a couple of examples. So I had a miscarriage at week 7, and that is a sad thing, right? But having a miscarriage at week 20, or I don't know if it's called a miscarriage at that stage, like that is objectively way, way worse than a week 7 miscarriage. I had a few people write to me saying I've had 3 miscarriages, right? That is objectively worse than me having 1 miscarriage. I already have 3 healthy children. So having a miscarriage at this stage, when I'm 37, is also objectively not as bad as you're right at the beginning of your journey, you desperately want to have a child and you have a miscarriage and you don't have any sort of live healthy children yet. Right? That's objectively worse because you don't have the consolation of it also causes a lot of fear that maybe I won't be able to have a child, maybe I'll never get pregnant, maybe I'll never be able to carry through to term. Like these are all objectively worse things. And, a really, really obvious example is what the Bibas family went through in these past couple of weeks. That is way worse than what I went through. And I think when you say that, a lot of women push back and go, no, everyone's grief is, just as valid as everyone else's, and there's no competition. And there isn't a competition, obviously, but there is such a thing as objectively greater and lesser levels of grief. And we should be able to acknowledge that. Again, I think it's a very controversial thing to say, but if you think about it logically, it is actually incredibly true. And there are a lot of things, in today's world that are logically true and are actually true, but are actually incredibly controversial to say. Like, for example, there are only 2 genders or there are only 2 biological sexes and you can't change them. And this was obvious to literally everyone in the world until about 5 minutes ago. But today it's it's against the status quo of what you're allowed to say. And this is the ridiculousness of the time that we live in when some really obvious truths are just really, really controversial to say. And you might be thinking, okay, why are you saying this? What's the point in saying this? Because the thing that most women do is they just kind of reflectively just repeat back. They say the things that you're supposed to say, rather than ever questioning it. And when you do question it, people say why do you need to question? Why can't you just say, what everyone else says? I think a part of that as well is along with like I said, women have a real commitment to egalitarianism. And they also have a real commitment to conformism. You have to say the things that you're supposed to say and you're not supposed to diverge from that. But the reason why I think it's so important to say is that, we are strong and we are resilient. And I think we are able to deal with these situations and move on relatively quickly. And don't get me wrong, I'm not somebody who, I know I probably sound a little bit mechanical and a little bit robotic with these things, but the day that I found out that I was having a miscarriage, I spent all the rest of the day just crying myself. I told my husband and asked him to take care of the kids so that I could just be on my own. And I watched some TV, and every so often just spontaneous crying would happen. I'd turn the TV off and I just needed some time to myself. I had a shower, I got into bed. I just cried my way through the afternoon and the evening, basically every so often, sort of then wanting to distract myself with a bit of TV and then going back to crying and kind of flitting between the two. But I woke up the next morning feeling very different, feeling like I had got it out of my system, feeling kind of a new resolve to just kind of like, okay, well, I think I'm, I've let it in, I felt it. I didn't feel the same intensity of emotions like that the next day that I still had a couple of cries and it hit me all of a sudden, but it was much less intense. And by the day after that, I was just kind of like ready to move on and just carry on with my life. And I know, again, like I explained with like my mum's death, I know that if you don't let grief in and you don't feel it and you don't allow yourself to feel the sadness and have a good cry and stuff like that, that it doesn't leave you. It stays with you and it gets very, very complicated and it holds you back in a lot of things. So I know the importance of doing that. But back when I was 25 and I started doing bereavement counselling finally, and I let it all in after also losing your mum at age 47 is also way worse than having a miscarriage, Kate. So it's like a different level of grief. But when I did finally let it in, it was so painful and it took me so long to get over. And a large part of that is because I had repressed it and hadn't like let it out. And I think sometimes people, when I tried to give this kind of message of like, yes, it is hard. Yes, it is sad, but you are also strong. You are resilient. And it isn't the saddest thing in the world. It isn't the worst thing in the world. You do need to pick yourself back up and you need to get on with it. Sometimes people like interpret that, and some women interpret that as me sort of being cold and not feeling all the feelings and not letting it in and trying to bypass it. And that's absolutely not what I do and not how I am. And it's not the message that I'm trying to convey. There's a balance, right? And I think that, when I look at my parents' generation, they were terrible, and they still are. They really don't know how to deal with their own emotions. They don't know how to deal with other people's emotions at all. And any sort of negative emotion, they really try to avoid the conflict, and they really, really struggle with it. And I see that, and I grew up with that, and I know what that's like. But I think that our generation goes too far the other way of then we always have to talk about our feelings. We have to mull over it. And we don't kind of move on from it. And often we get stuck in it because we feel like we need to talk about it so much and rehash it so much. And I think there is a certain stage of grief and sadness where you need to talk to everyone about it. You need to talk about it in different ways. You need to let it out. You need to feel it. You need to let it in and all of that stuff. But then you need to move past it and you need to get back on with life. And I think we miss that bit because we're all so terrified of being, like our parents' generation, which obviously isn't healthy and isn't a good way to be. We swing way too far the other way. And everything is a trauma and everything is the end of the world and everything is absolutely the worst thing you can go through. And people are are allowed months and months to heal for something that really only takes a couple of days. And we go too far, just like with a lot of other things, we go too far the other way. And one of my favorite expressions is be the balance, right? Don't try to be the counterbalance to something that isn't good. Try and be the balance that you want to see in the world. And that's much, much harder than just swinging too far the other way. And I think we really need to learn how to do this with our feelings. And for anyone who's interested, there's a great book called Bad Therapy by a woman called Abigail Schreier that it has formulated a lot of my thoughts on this because until I read the book, I felt like this was true, but I didn't know how to word it. And what she talks about is how we over-pathologize things with children and we put them into therapy and we do all this, like everyone has to go to see a therapist and see a psychologist, and we often like rehash things over and over and over again rather than just kind of like dealing with it and then moving on. And in Bad Therapy, she talks about how we do that in children. And I can certainly see that in our culture where for every little thing we get, especially Americans will send their child to therapy, but also adults do it. You see the adverts for for BetterHelp, and it's like kind of, everyone should see a therapist. And I remember at one point in my life saying, everyone should see a therapist. And I just don't think that's true. I think that's an overreach and kind of the pendulum swinging too far the other way because we're so scared of repressing our emotions and not feeling them. And there is a healthy middle ground. And I think that that's a message that I really want to convey, and I really think is true and right for me. Is that absolutely, I want to be somebody who can have a good cry. I want to be somebody who can feel my feelings. But then I also think we need to have proportionality in, what's going on. Okay. Like, you can't be grieving a 7-week miscarriage for like 6 months, right? You need to be able to move past it and get on with the other aspects of life. And it always stays with you, obviously, but you can't then make that the focal point of your life, and you need to move on. And there are worse things. And you need to be able to also see the other side of grief, which is where it can help to accentuate what we actually do have and what we should be grateful for, and what we need to be grateful for. It can help accentuate like our joy and our gratitude and the good things that we have. And we need to be able to do that as well as grieve and feel sadness. And I just thought that was a really important message. That was something that I tried to convey, but obviously it's an Instagram post. There's only so much nuance that you can get across. But I thought that was a really important message to share. And I wanted to elaborate on that a little bit in a podcast for anyone who is interested, because a lot of people did write to me saying, I think your approach is really great. Like, you're seeing the sadness, but you're also being strong, and you're showing that you can, move on from this. And as I said before, I also got quite a lot of criticism and pushback for maybe not giving myself enough space, which I think is actually incorrect. And they were misreading the situation because they think that, they're not used to hearing that message of, yes, I'm sad, but I'm also strong, and I'm strong enough to deal with this. And so are you. Okay. That was 40 minutes, very long podcast episode on my thoughts and like experience around this. And I don't even know if anyone is going to listen to this. I'm more just making it for myself. I wanted to think about the lessons that I've learned over the past couple of weeks, and just kind of like process that a little bit and put all of this in some sort of order and into words. So if you've got this far, thanks for listening. I'd love to hear what you think about it. And yeah, back to some normal content next week, I think.